Hello, everybody. It's Richard Vancamp. I am the author of A Blanket of Butterflies with High Water Press, illustrated by Scott Henderson, colored by Donovan Yachuk, and you're listening to True North Country Comics. Masi Cho. Thank you.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Richard Vancamp about his graphic novel, A Blanket of Butterflies. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Richard is a proud member of the Clecho-Dene Nation from Fort Smith, Northwest Territories. He's the author of more than 25 books, including The Lesser Blessed, a feature film, the Eisner Award-nominated graphic novel A Blanket of Butterflies with Scott B. Henderson, and Three Feathers, also a feature film. He's a contributor to the groundbreaking graphic novel anthology This Place, 150 Years Retold. Richard is also the author of 5 collections of short stories, including Night Moves, and 6 baby books, including the award-winning Little You with Julie Flett. Now released by High Water Press in full-color edition with additional cultural context about the experiences of Indigenous and Japanese Canadian people during the Second World War, A Blanket of Butterflies is Volume 1 in the Spirit of Denaday series. The story follows a young Clecho-Dene boy from Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, that's Vancamp's hometown, who helps a Japanese man reclaim his grandfather's lost samurai sword and armor. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Richard Vancamp about his graphic novel, A Blanket of Butterflies. So, Richard Vancamp, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Hey, well, thank you for having me. Masi Cho. Thank you.
I appreciate your time. Before we get started, though, I want to ask you, what was the first comic book that you read?
Okay, well, you've asked the most important question of all. So, I was born and raised in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, and I just want to say to our listeners, Donat e Dant e Sagyamasi. My friends, thank you so much for joining us today. I was born and raised in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories. I was born in 1971. And this is crucial for what I'm about to share with you.
Okay.
Because I know, John, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. So I had to move in my grade 2 and 3. I went from born and raised Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, population 2,500, officially quadrilingual. So Chippewa and Cree, French and English are spoken at any given time. We are the beginning of Highway 5. We're on the Alberta border, and WT as well. And we're the Métis capital of the Northwest Territories. So I went from that little community with my family to Calgary.
Oh.
My parents had to work on their degrees at the University of Calgary. And it was a blessing because as soon as we got to Calgary, my appendix exploded.
Oh, my goodness.
And I actually collapsed. I remember, I don't remember this, but I'm told I fainted. And I woke up in the Calgary Children's Hospital. And I was there for over a week. I woke up in an oxygen tent, and one of my lungs had collapsed, and my blood had turned septic. And it was a really close call. And I don't think I would have made it had we stayed in the Northwest Territories.
Yeah.
But I made some friends who are neighbors, Chris and Toby, and I feel horrible. I can't remember their last names. But they were told I wasn't going to make it.
Oh.
And so they showed up wearing their suits. And they gave me their entire comic book collection.
Oh,
it was a stack of comics, and there was Sergeant Rock and Silver Surfer and Unknown Soldier and a couple of Conans. But in that pile was Warlord issue 13 by Mike Grell.
Oh, wow.
and they said, we're really sorry, Rich. Sorry things are going the way they're going for you.
Yeah.
You may need these where you're going. And we're just so sorry we didn't have more time with you. And we had just been talking a couple days before about the pharaohs and how, many beings, many slaves, many horses were slaughtered in the belief that, your servants and your horses would be waiting for you in the spirit world.
Right.
So I put 2 and 2 together really quickly. And that's when I realized the true escalating horror of they don't think I'm going to make it.
Oh.
Yeah. And so anyways, so they left and they said they would keep me in, their prayers. I was really grateful.
Yeah.
But John, to answer your question, I must have read The Warlord issue 13 by Mike Grell hundreds of times.
Wow.
And it was finally the one comic that spoke to me, because this wasn't a superhero.
Yeah.
This was a pilot who had discovered a secret world inside planet Earth. And I think he had a 9mm something with limitless ammo. That was the best part of this, was that the bullets just never stopped when he needed them the most.
Right.
But that didn't matter, because he had to face magic and machines and dinosaurs and demons and sorcery. So I made myself a deal. I said, A, I'm not going to die here, because I got so much life I want to live. I'm just a little kid. And B, when I get out and I'm strong enough, I'm going to get the first 12 issues of The Warlord. I got to figure out how this guy got here.
Mm-hmm.
I'd walked into a mystery. And then when I was strong enough and I got out, I went to Kensington Market.
Oh.
And I walked in with my little brother, Raj, and I said, excuse me, I'd like to buy the first 12 copies of The Warlord by Mike Grell. And the guy looked at me and goes, son, I don't know what to tell you. We're up to, I think, issue 47.
Oh.
And I was so happy, because rather than having to track down the first 12, I had to track down the first 41 copies. And then suddenly I had a quest. And of course, comics in Calgary, it's such a huge scene there that there's so many great comic shops in Calgary that suddenly I was piecemealing this entire collection. It took me years to get all the issues. And that was the gateway drug for me, was The Warlord, issue 13, Mike Grell, and I am so grateful.
Absolutely, and grateful that you're still around to tell the story.
Yeah, me too.
That's the thing. There you go. Well, that was a great book growing up, but I'm wondering who or what inspires you to create today?
Well, actually, in Edmonton, where I live, Treaty 6 country, we've got incredible comic shops here. So I go to Warp 1, which is on White Ave, and I also go on 99th to my friend's shop. It's called We Have Issues. And so the two titles that I collect right now are Something is Killing the Children and A Righteous Thirst for Vengeance. And that's by Rick Remender, Andre Araujo, I believe is the last name. Anyways, it just, both are incredible. I read The Walking Dead for, I think, 13 years from the beginning to the end. And I actually met Robert Kirkman. And I told him, you deserve to win the Nobel Peace Prize for Literature, because I've been reading you for 13 years.
Oh, my.
And it never lets up.
Right.
You've never disappointed me. And I couldn't thank him enough. And so I'm a huge fan. I've been collecting ever since then. So I'm 51. What's 51 minus 7? That's how many years I've been collecting. And
there you go.
I love comics. I love graphic novels. And I'm really honored to be included in your roster of interviewees.
Oh, well, thank you for your time. And speaking of graphic novels, let's talk about your latest graphic novel, A Blanket of Butterflies. Or if you could talk a bit about the story and maybe what inspired you to write it.
Sure. So A Blanket of Butterflies is published by Highwater Press. And the artist is Scott Henderson, and Highwater Press is in Winnipeg. And we have Donovan Yashuk is our colorist. And A Blanket of Butterflies was released several years ago in black and white. And the reason that we re-released it in color is once book 1 came out, we were nominated for the Eisner Award, which was a huge honor. And we were shortlisted. And to even be included in the caliber of the writers that I really admire globally was a really special time, because it's months of anticipation. And actually, I was at Warp 1 when I realized, I checked my phone and I was notified there was actually the Silver Surfer one that year, the Eisner. It was the wedding issue, it was the 40th anniversary.
Right.
And that's cool, because that original pile of comics that Chris and Toby gave me, the Silver Surfer was in there.
There you go.
So let's cut to A Blanket of Butterflies. So the genesis behind the story is my dear friend James Crozier was a security guard at our museum in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, the Northern Lights Museum. And you'll notice that on page 1, panel 1, it opens with the Northern Lights Museum in my community. It's really important that my comics are set in my community, because I want Fort Smithers and Northerners to see our town, our people, our culture, our traditions. But James, my dear friend, kept telling me, dude, there's a real suit of samurai armor at our own museum. And I was really into ninjas, probably like yourself growing up. I wanted to be a ninja. I had the Chuck Norris extended crotch jeans.
Oh, wow.
If that even means anything. But I would, turn pop cans into throwing stars, and I'd keep little packages of sugar and salt underneath my sleeves in case anyone wanted to fight me. I could blind them and run away. I could make hockey stick nunchucks out of broken hockey sticks and stolen bicycle chains. That was my little claim to fame. I was a pretty wicked breakdancer too, but that was all part of the craft.
Sure.
Right? That was the front I was selling, because underneath I was a shadow warrior.
Yeah.
Anyways, I didn't believe my dear friend James Crozier, who was also my dungeon master when we played Dungeons and Dragons. And then a little while later, I was with the late and great Mr. Ray Curry, who was the museum director. I said, Mr. Curry, he was also the grade 5 teacher in Fort Smith, so I could never call him Ray.
Right.
He was always Mr. Curry.
Sure.
I said, excuse me, Mr. Curry. He's like, you can call me Ray, Richard. I'm pushing 70, bro. I'm like, I can't. I said, Mr. Curry, is it really true? James Crozier says that when he was a security guard, he saw all these boxes for a real suit of samurai armor. And he went, oh yeah, we got one. We got a real suit of samurai armor. And I couldn't believe it. I said, what? And he goes, oh yeah, you want me to set it up tomorrow? Come by tomorrow, 11 o'clock. There's about 5 or 6 boxes, and we'll open them up for you, and you can have a look, take photos. And so I said, well, yeah, please. And I went the next day, and my jaw dropped when I realized that James Crozier, yes, the great one, was telling the truth.
Wow.
And so that became the million-dollar question was, how on earth did a full suit of samurai armor end up in our little community? And I started to do some research, and I found out that now there are 3 theories. Everyone listening, if you Google samurai suit Fort Smith Northwest Territories on CBC, they'll show you the 3 theories. Okay. And I don't give 2 hoots about the other 2. I only care about my little theory. Right. My little theory is that this was originally supposed to go to Fort Smith, Arkansas, USA, where there was a real war memorial museum.
Right.
There's a wing that's devoted to the samurai armor and the swords and the katanas and all that stuff. And I mean, I'd love to go there, but so that's my theory and so I always imagine this hungover Canada Post summer student who's been out all night at a rager, squinting through little tiny eyes, going, oh God, never again. And looking at all these boxes and just saying, I don't even know what that says. Can't read the handwriting. I think it's Fort Smith NWT, Gateway to Wood Buffalo National Park. Send them all there. That's it.
Yep.
And that's my theory. And so I always say the 2 most important words as a writer in my career that I use all the time, and I always encourage others to use, is what if.
Perfect. Yeah.
And I started to think, well, what if a man from Japan who had all the repatriation papers and could prove that this was his ancestors' suit of armor, what if he came to Fort Smith and his name is Shinobu, based on one of my characters from one of my favorite video games? What if Shinobu came to Fort Smith to retrieve his family's suit of samurai armor? And unfortunately, what if when he got there, the katana that was also supposed to be there was lost in the card game by the previous museum director, who had a bit of a gambling problem? And what if the new owner of his ancestor's samurai sword is one of the most dangerous men in the Northwest Territories, and his name is Benny the Bank, and the men who work for him are equally as dangerous? And so this becomes the quest for Shinobu. At the same time, I open it with a young man named Sonny, who's Tlicho Dene, a member of my nation, who goes every day to look at the suit of samurai armor because he's scared of it. Yet he's drawn to it. It's like a Ouija board.
Right.
And what if on this particular day he's there when Shinobu shows up? And what if on this particular day Sonny races after Shinobu and says, don't do it. They already know you're here, and they know you're coming for the sword. And Benny the Bank is very, very dangerous, and the brothers who work with him are even more dangerous. Don't go. And Shinobu says, how do you know I'm not dangerous? And that's when the little boy, the young man, points at the tattoo that Shinobu has on his hand, and it's a butterfly. And that's the same butterfly that's in the armor. That's the family emblem that's in the armor. And he says, because you're the butterfly man, and I'm going to tell you exactly how Torchy and Flinch, the giant, are going to attack you when you go to see Benny the Bank. And that's how it opens.
Very good. Yeah. Very intriguing story, I must say. I was very intrigued by it, for sure.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad. Thank you.
Yeah, very well done. So I wanted to ask you a bit more about the creative process working with the artists, Scott and Donovan. How did that work out?
Well, with Scott, so the first edition was in black and white, and I've been a huge fan of Scott Henderson's for years. His work with David Robertson on their graphic novel series, 7 Generations, is jaw-droppingly gorgeous. So when I pitched the idea to the publishers at Highwater Press, Annalie and Catherine, they loved it. And when I delivered the script, they loved it even more. And I said, if we're going to do this, I really need to work with Scott Henderson. They said, sure. So they sent it to Scott. And of course, Scott is very busy. And Scott said, yeah, I really want to work on this with Richard. So we did it. We released it. We were very happy. And then about a year later, the characters came back to me and they said, well, wait a minute here, we're not done. And I ended up writing completely on my own, without anyone's knowledge, book 2, which is called As I Enfold You in Petals. And so I sent that to Highwater and I said, hey, just want to let you know, I've just written book 2 and After a Blanket of Butterflies. And I hope you love it. I think it's just as beautiful as book 1. And it introduces a whole pile of new characters while honoring Benny the Bank and his family and Torchy and Flinch and Sven. And they wrote back and they said, well, we love it. Let's buy 2 more books off you. Let's make this a trilogy. Can you think of a name for the series? And I thought, well, it really is about the spirit of Dead End Day. It's about the spirit of the Northwest Territories, the grace and beauty of who we are as Northerners. And there is a spirit that announces herself throughout the series. And in book 3, which I was working on this morning, you start to understand who she is. Yeah. So that's how, Highwater is just a joy to work with. We have a graphic novel called 3 Feathers with them, with a beautiful cover by Menton 3. And we worked with a local artist named Crystal Mateus. And that's about restorative justice. But I also worked with Highwater on This Place 150 Years Retold, which is huge. That was a 4-year journey for all of us. I don't think they realized how long that project would take. But as in life, it always takes longer when you want to do things right.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great book. Everyone should have that for sure. Sure. Well, want to get talking to you a little bit more serious here, I guess, about the relationship between literature and life. And you talked a bit about, the fact that you found the samurai sword in the museum, but can you talk a little bit about how this relates, literature and life?
Well, one thing I realized, I didn't actually answer your question. So what's it like working with Scott?
Yeah.
Working with Scott Henderson is a dream come true because he's an economist. He's a very efficient artist. So I'll give you an example. When you open A Blanket of Butterflies, there's that splash page very quickly when Shinobu encounters the brothers Torchy and Sven. And Torchy and Sven are Clicho Dene like myself, but they've been trained in a martial arts called the Dance of Pain. And so one of my favorite martial arts scenes is the classic Korean feature film Old Boy. If you go and you YouTube that knife fight in the train station with the hammer, I've watched that hundreds of times. So I ended up writing, I think it was 6 pages of the ultimate martial arts showdown because Shinobu is also an expert fighter as well. And I remember I got an email from Scott Henderson saying, dude, they're only giving us 48 pages to tell the story.
Right.
I don't have a whole lot of real estate to work with as it is for what you want to do. Leave me with the 6 pages of the ultimate martial arts, throwdown. And I have an idea I'll run past you, and I'll send you the thumbnails in a couple days. And then literally, I think the next morning. And the best part of Scott Henderson is he works at night. So when I wake up, I've got all these thumbnails to look at or the inks or his ideas for character sketches. But what he proposed was what you see. And that is, a really pronounced martial arts, moment in a brawl. But behind, you see the series of moves in the background of how they got there. And that's when I knew that, Scott Henderson is the artist for the series. And then how, we ended up working with Donovan, the greatest colorist in Canada, I'm convinced, is when we realized that we were going to work on a trilogy, they had used Donovan Yachuk to work with Katerina Vermette and David Robertson on their series, and he'd certainly colored some of my stuff earlier in different anthologies. But I said, if we're going to do this, we've got to be in color. We want to compete with anything that DC and Boom Studios and IDW and Marvel are putting out. And I really do feel that, the new edition of The Spirit of Denaday, A Blanket of Butterflies, it can compete. We can show that to anyone, anywhere, anytime in the world, and they see that Indigenous literature is quality, it's world-class, it's riveting, it's beautiful. At the same time, it really promotes our culture. I'm really proud that in there, you can read our Dene laws, which are about kindness and respect. You get to learn about the prophet Ea from Delaney, who warned us about the uranium mines in the Northwest Territories, and that one day white people would come and work with the Dene to take black eggs out of the earth and put them in the bellies of birds that are so powerful they never have to flap their wings. And he warned everybody, there's going to be a day when birds so powerful they never have to flap their wings are carrying black eggs from our land. And there's going to be a day when those two black birds follow the sun to where it goes at night when we sleep. And these birds are going to drop 2 eggs on people who look just like us. And there's going to be a fire so bright, it leaves only their shadows on what's left of their homes. We must never help the white people when they come north looking for the black eggs in our earth. And of course, we didn't listen. Yeah. And you start to understand that those uranium mines were port radium and ray rock mines, and that my ancestors and slavey ancestors, they worked with the federal government, Canadian military, American military on the Canoel project, which is also known as the Highway of the Atom. And they worked in the Congo, they worked in the United States to cultivate that uranium that was used for the detonation over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And Ea passed in either 1940 or 1941. And as you know, the detonation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was several years later. So the prophet Ea passed before his worst nightmare came true. But we didn't listen, right? And we continually don't listen. When as soon as you hear jobs, well, sometimes common sense goes out the window, right? Right. Let's lop off the top of an entire mountain for another coal mine. Sounds good. Jobs. Yeah. Even though we know better, right? We're gonna jeopardize all this land and displace the traditional migration patterns of all these species. Let's drain a whole pile of lakes and let's divert rivers, and that sounds good. Jobs. Anyways, so that's really, I hope that answers your question, that we have the dream team. I can't wait for you to see what book 2 looks like. We're working on the arcs right now for book 2. They're just tweaking the colors, and oh man, we're sitting on a gold mine. I always say this is what Metallica must have felt like when they were sitting on the Black Album before they released it. They knew what they had.
Well, that's exciting. That's absolutely exciting. Now, you've touched on this before about why you created this story, what inspired you, but I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about the relationship between literature and life. Was there something that literally forced you to write this story that you could not ignore?
Well, I think, especially now as a father, I want my little one, it's Ozzy, who's 8. I was thinking, where are you going to go where you can have quick access to the reminder of our Dene laws? And I always like to put teachings in, whether it's my short stories or my baby books or my kids' books or my graphic novels. And I did have an agenda, and that was I wanted to have a graphic novel, a comic book that had our Dene laws, but I really wanted to honor Ea, because the elder George Blondin, who shared that story with us in 1991 when I was in college, George had passed. I was the editor for the last book he ever wrote. It's called Trail of the Spirit, Mysteries of Medicine Power Revealed. And to answer your question, I had a panic because I thought, well, Mr. George Blondin is now passed. Who's going to know this story that he shared with us about Ea? And that really connected, Shinobu's people and ancestors to Dene ancestors. And that's why. And the other thing I wanted to do was I really have never seen a comic book or a graphic novel where the grandmother is the hero.
Yeah.
So, sometimes you see that in a movie or sometimes you see that in a fable, but I thought, no, because there's so many elders that are raising their grandbabies all by themselves on limited income. And I really wanted to showcase that something has happened and she's raising her grandson by herself. And she's the one that stops escalating violence between warriors using protocol.
Right.
And that was really important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that was came out of left field, but it's certainly a very powerful story when it's told that way. Absolutely. I also want to ask you if you can talk to the popularity of Indigenous graphic novels that we're seeing just exploding all over the place now. How does it capture the experiences and perspectives different from what a text-based book would do?
Well, you stumbled on the $1 million question. I think that as Indigenous people, we are starving to see ourselves on the big screen, in literature, in video games, in pop culture. I think you look at Reservation Dogs right now on Disney and what that means to the people. You know, I was a writer trainee for the TV series North of 60.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so when you have a visual medium, I always think to myself, what a perfect way to introduce yourself to another culture through the food and through the literature and through the cinema and through the songs and the art and the dance. So this is, I think, illustrated literature is such a gentle welcome into our culture. And I think that as consumers, as fans and fanatics and readers of comic books, for example, to finally see people that look like you, that talk like you, that sound like you, that move like you, that believe in what you believe, I think it's so refreshing, right? Because we've been spoon-fed superheroes and the franchise of it all. I get it. That's never been my thing. So what I love, like The Warlord by Mike Grell, was the human story, where there weren't any, or the Conan story, where all you have is the brawn and the brains, and you've got to think your way out of this because you're a stranger in a strange land, and that wants desperately to devour you and destroy you. With my literature, for example, I don't think the environment wants to destroy you. I think that it's other people. And another thing I love about A Blanket of Butterflies, I was just thinking about this the other day, is that there are so many heroes in this story, and perhaps the most compelling is Benny the Bank, because he becomes, as the series grows, he becomes the reluctant hero of something far bigger than he ever realizes, and he starts to see it at the end. He's part of something huge. And that is the great reclaiming that we're all witnessing right now with Indigenous people.
Right. Interesting. Okay. I also wanted to ask you why you highlighted gambling as a social hazard in the story, and maybe you could comment on your observation of its impact on Indigenous communities around you.
Well, I certainly can't speak to how it impacts. So, growing up in Fort Smith, whether it's Crib or Crazy 8 Countdown, Northerners seem to have a lot of time on their hands. I don't know if we're waiting out a whole pile of storms or blizzards, but when I think about, the gambling that happens, I just had to throw that in there.
Right.
And also, it's a really clever device, because the story would be over if Shinobu showed up with the repatriation papers and that katana was right there in one of those boxes. Then he'd hop on a plane. We wouldn't have a story.
Right.
Conflict reveals character.
Sure.
So when you show up and you realize the last museum director in it, through nefarious means lost something that didn't even belong to them, to the most dangerous man in town, now you got a story. So I just happened to use gambling as the vehicle in which the katana was lost.
Okay. Yeah,
sorry, there isn't more drama.
No, that makes sense. Now, as a writer, I wanted to ask you how storytelling offers a chance to move towards historical understanding and reconciliation in this day and age.
Well, that's a great question. I remember when Highwater Press sent me the children's book. It's called When We Were Alone by David Robertson and Julie Flett. And when you open it, I knew by page 3 that they were going to win the Governor General's Award, because it is such a gentle welcome into the aftermath of what residential schools did and continues to do to so many Indigenous families and communities across Canada. They had nailed it, and to use it through children's literature, it was very clever on behalf of David and Highwater and Julie Flett. And they earned it. They deserve it. So again, I really do feel like when you think about books like This Place 150 Years Retold, for that to be, in so many different classrooms and thousands of classrooms, it really is a safe way for readers to start to understand the history of Indigenous people. The good, the resilient, the dignity, but also the harm that has occurred through, this culture of extinguishment that we have all survived.
Right.
That's why, and that's where great comics and great TV shows and great music and videos, this is where pop culture comes in, because it's to be consumed. It's internationally. It's an international welcome to our culture. It's like, this is who we are. This is what we survived, and look at how beautiful and proud we are today. That's what I'm finding with a lot of the stories that are coming out in Indigenous country.
Absolutely. So I wanted to ask you then, after a reader gets through your book, what do you think they'll react? How do you hope they'll react after reading your books?
Well, I hope they bawl their eyes out after they finish reading A Blanket of Butterflies, because I certainly bawled my eyes out writing it. Sure. And my dear mentor, the late and great Lee Miracle, said, if you're crying while you're writing it, they'll be crying when they're reading it. So what I would love is that if you read A Blanket of Butterflies and you love it, please know that those characters are in all of my books. Torchy, Sven, Flinch, Benny the Bank. They're all in my short story collections and in other illustrated stories that we have with Scott Henderson. Mermaids, for example, is the story of Torchy meeting Snowbird. I hope it's the gateway drug into my literature, but also other Indigenous writers that are doing great work, like Tasha Spillett. Surviving the City Volume 2 is a masterpiece, and I hope you consider interviewing her. Tasha's doing great work with her comic books. David Robertson's, I'll always go back to Seven Generation Stone. If you want to see a masterclass in visual storytelling, check out David Robertson and Scott Henderson. I really want to just raise my hands with absolute respect to Scott Henderson, because he's working with Katrina Vermette, myself, David Robertson. He's book solid. In fact, there's no rush for me to finish book 3 because Scott Henderson is so booked, and I don't want to work with anybody else on this series. Right. And in fact, I was saying to Scott the other day that he posted a video. He'd somehow hurt his hand mountain biking. I think and you could hear screaming all the way across Turtle Island because everyone who was relying on good old Scott Henderson for the various dream projects that we're working on with him. I said, Mary Hart insured her legs for $1 million each down in the States. You better insure those hands for $1 million each.
You bet. Yeah.
Those are national treasures.
Goodness. Yeah. I hope he's got a swift sort of recovery there. That's for sure.
He's fine. Yeah. If he's building Lego, he's good enough to illustrate our comic books. He's a big Lego fanatic, right? So he's always like, look, I just did the Sandcrawler. I'm like, looks like he's back.
That's it. For sure.
Can't keep a good man down.
That's right. Well, I want to thank you for doing this interview, but I want to ask you, how will you be promoting your book this year? Do you have any plans to attend any conventions or festivals?
Oof, good question. All I know is that what we're doing right now, I'm actually very reluctant to tour with COVID. So I'm more than happy to do interviews like this because I am home, I am safe. But I think the other thing that you wanted to know, what comics am I working on right now?
Yeah, what can you talk about?
Well, anytime you meet somebody who says, "Yeah, listen, man, I got a DNC, I can't really talk about what I'm working on," I just want to laugh my head off and go, "Really? Yeah, are you serious? Like, as if, come on, right? Unless you're launching the space shuttle, I don't know." So I got news for you. There's no DNCs. There's no clauses in which I'm not allowed to speak. I'll tell you exactly what I'm working on. I'm loud and proud to talk about what I'm working on. Sure. Because I'm so grateful and so happy. So I'm working on 2 graphic novels with Renegade Arts Entertainment out of Canmore, Alberta. Alexander Finbow is an incredible publisher, an incredible editor. And we've got 2 graphic novels we're working on called We To Go War. And so we have my dream artist for this series, Mr. Christopher Shy.
Okay.
He did all the Wheel of Time promo, all the artwork for the recent HBO series. I've been a fan of Christopher's for 15 years. I've wanted to work with him for 15 years.
Wow.
And he sent in the first 24 pages of our first graphic novel, which is called Roth, Roth, We To Go War. And it's about somebody very special who was bit by a Wheatigo or a Wendigo. But he's holding one of our sacred roots. And he knows that if he lets go of this root, he's going to turn full Wheatigo. And he has to go rescue his family in the city who are surrounded by Wheatigo.
Oh, my.
They have returned and they are starving and they have their own ceremonies. And so it's horror. It's great. I'm excited. It's terrifying.
Well, it sounds like something to look forward to. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, well, I can't wait to. When it's out, we'll send you copies.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the gossip train.
Yeah. So it sounds like you got a lot on the go. So I'm wondering do you have a website where you recommend people go to find out about your current and your future projects?
Sure, you can go to richardvancamp.com, and if you can't get enough, if the honey's just too sweet, you can go to my YouTube channel, Richard Vancamp on YouTube. You can see the interviews and stories, and I've been able to upload a lot of beautiful tea dances and drum dances thanks to Mr. John Gahn. You can see my late grandmother, Melanie Law. She singing a beautiful Dene love song. Took me 9 years to find that video. And you can also check out Richard Vancamp on SoundCloud, and you can hear my short stories being read and my interviews with other authors. And I've been having a lot of fun during the pandemic. I've been digitizing a lot of the interviews I did with elders back in 1991 when I was the handy bus driver in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, my hometown.
Very good. Well, Richard, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
No, I'm so grateful to comic books and graphic novels. I feel that they, for anyone saying that comic books and graphic novels aren't a legitimate literature, I would argue, look at the Sandman. Look at the joy of everything. When I was collecting the Sandman when it first came out, I'm a huge fan of so many authors and artists. When I think about, Oink, Heaven's Butcher by John Mueller, or George Pratt's War Idol, Enemy Ace, or you think about Havoc and Wolverine with Ken Williams, when you think about Elektra Assassin with Bill Sienkiewicz, when you think about these comic books that we've carded, sometimes when you're in college, you move 19 times in 3 years. Yeah. Those long boxes that you hold on to, just looking at them just fills you with light and wonder, and joy. I'll always be a huge fan of comics. And you know what? I will say, if it wasn't for Warlord issue 13, when I was a little kid in the Calgary Children's Hospital in an oxygen tent with one lung and a drainage tube where my appendix used to be. That's pretty disgusting, I'm sorry. But if it wasn't for that, I don't think I'd be a writer today. I really don't. And that's why for A Blanket of Butterflies and Three Feathers and This Place 150 Years Retold and We To Go War, it all goes back to Mike Grell, issue 13. And that's the power of literature. All it takes is one book to light a life on fire in a good and beautiful way.
Thanks to Richard for taking time to chat with me. You can discover more about Richard on Twitter and Instagram at Richard Vancamp and online at richardvancamp.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also, check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel and hit the notification button. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2022.